It started subtly, the way illness often does. A lingering fatigue that clung to my bones, a soft-headedness that made simple thoughts feel like wading through mud. My husband, Mark, was immediately concerned. Of course he was. He's a doctor, after all. Attentive, brilliant, my rock. He'd sit on the edge of the bed, his brow furrowed with professional worry, taking my pulse and looking into my eyes with a small penlight. "Your pupils are a bit sluggish," he'd murmur, his voice a calm, reassuring baritone that had always made me feel safe. "We need to get to the bottom of this." He took over everything. He insisted I stop working, my job as a graphic designer being too strenuous, he said. He managed all my meals, preparing broths and nutrient-dense smoothies himself. "We can't risk an inflammatory response from processed foods," he'd explain, setting a tray on my lap. He brewed special herbal teas for me throughout the day, complex blends that smelled of earth and bitter roots, which he said were for cellular support. I was so tired, so grateful for his care that I never questioned it. I drank every last drop, believing it was medicine. The world began to shrink, until it was just the four walls of our bedroom. My friends would call, but I was often too exhausted to talk. Mark would field their calls, updating them in quiet, grave tones. "She's having a difficult day," I'd hear him say from the hallway. "She needs her rest." Eventually, the calls became less frequent. I felt a pang of loneliness, but was too fogged to hold on to the feeling for long. My life was a cycle of waking, drinking the tea Mark brought, eating the food Mark made, and drifting back into a heavy, dreamless sleep. I was a ghost in my own home, a patient in a one-bed hospital where my husband was the sole physician. There were moments of clarity, though. Brief, sharp flashes where the fog would lift for an instant. I'd look at Mark as he meticulously measured powders into his tea infusions, and a strange feeling would prickle at the back of my mind, a feeling that this wasn't right. He was so clinical. His care felt less like love and more like a procedure. I'd see him watching me, his expression unreadable, and the hairs on my arms would stand on end. Then the weakness would wash over me again, and the thought would dissolve like sugar in water. It was just the illness, I'd tell myself, the illness making me paranoid. The turning point came on a day I felt slightly better. A sliver of my old self had returned. I was able to get out of bed and walk around the house without the familiar dizziness. Mark was at the hospital for a long shift. The silence in the house was a relief. I decided to do something normal, something mundane. I needed to find a receipt for a camera lens I'd bought for work, hoping to claim it on our insurance. I knew Mark kept all the financial paperwork in his home office, a room that had become his sanctuary, a space I rarely entered anymore. The office was immaculate, sterile, not a paper out of place. I opened the filing cabinet, the metal cool beneath my fingers. I couldn't find the folder for electronics receipts, but another file caught my eye. It was thick, with a new-looking tab that simply read, "Policy." My curiosity got the better of me. I thought perhaps it was a new policy for the house or the cars. I pulled it out. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs as I read the first page. It was a life insurance policy, and it was on me. The policy was new, taken out just a few months ago, right when my illness had started to worsen. I scanned the details, my hands starting to tremble. The payout was staggering, 7 figures, enough to start a new life several times over, and the sole beneficiary, listed in crisp black ink, was my husband, Dr. Mark Thorne. A cold wave washed over me, so intense, it felt like I'd been plunged into ice water. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. People take out life insurance on their spouses all the time. It's normal. But the timing felt like a punch to the gut. I was about to put the folder back, to dismiss it as paranoia, when a smaller, thinner folder, tucked behind it, slid partially out. This one was labeled with my name. Not a policy, just my name. My fingers felt numb as I opened it. Inside were copies of lab reports, blood work, pages and pages of numbers and medical jargon I didn't understand. But I recognized the letterhead of a private lab across town, one I had never been to. Mark had always drawn my blood himself at home, telling me he was sending it to the hospital lab for testing. He always came back with the same vague results. Everything looks mostly normal, just some markers of inflammation. We'll keep monitoring. These reports were different. They were detailed. I didn't understand what elevated levels of thallium meant or why chronic ethylene glycol exposure was highlighted in yellow, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I wasn't supposed to see this. This was his real research. This was the data from the samples he took from me. My body was a project. This file was the log of his experiment. My breath hitched. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I took pictures of every single page of the insurance policy. I photographed every lab report, making sure the dates and values were clear. The click of the camera shutter sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I carefully placed both folders exactly where I had found them, slid the filing cabinet drawer shut, and wiped the handle with the sleeve of my sweater. I crept out of his office, my mind reeling. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a cage. And I was living with my potential murderer. That evening, when Mark came home, he smiled, kissed my forehead, and asked how I was feeling. I looked into the eyes of the man I had loved for a decade and felt nothing but ice-cold terror. "A little tired," I whispered, forcing a weak smile. He nodded sympathetically and went to the kitchen. "Don't worry," he called out, his voice smooth and comforting. "I'll make you your tea." The days that followed were the hardest of my life. I had to perform, to play the part of the frail, trusting wife, while a silent scream was trapped in my chest. Every time Mark handed me a mug of his special tea, my stomach would clench. I'd raise it to my lips, pretending to sip, and when he turned away, I'd pour a little into the soil of a potted plant by my bed. When he brought me meals, I'd push the food around the plate, claiming I had no appetite, then flush most of it down the toilet when I was alone. I was starving, but the fear was a more powerful hunger. I needed a plan. I couldn't confront him. He was a doctor. He held all the cards. He had curated a narrative for months that I was a sick, deteriorating woman. If I suddenly accused him of poisoning me, who would believe me? He would twist it, make me sound delusional, paranoid. He could probably have me committed. He had the power, the reputation, the knowledge. All I had were a few photos on my phone and a terrifying secret. My first priority was to get a second opinion on those lab results. I couldn't go to another doctor. Mark would see the insurance claim or find out somehow. He had an unnerving way of knowing things. I waited for another day when he had a long shift. I told him I was feeling too weak to even get out of bed, a performance that was becoming frighteningly easy. Once his car was gone, I used my laptop, but not our home Wi-Fi. I used my phone as a mobile hotspot, terrified he might be monitoring our network traffic. I typed the chemical names from the lab reports into a search engine. Thallium. The results flooded the screen. A heavy metal. Odorless, tasteless, a classic poison used in assassinations. The symptoms of chronic exposure were listed in cold, clinical bullet points: fatigue, nerve pain, confusion, hair loss, gastrointestinal distress. It was like reading a biography of my last 6 months. Then I searched for ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze. It was sweet, easily hidden in drinks. Chronic, low-dose exposure caused kidney damage and neurological symptoms: dizziness, brain fog, sluggishness. I leaned back, my head spinning. It was real. It wasn't paranoia. It was all there, in black and white, a perfect match for my mysterious illness. He was killing me, slowly, methodically, and documenting the entire process. He wasn't just trying to get rid of me for the insurance money, he was treating it like a research project. The cold academic curiosity of it was almost more horrifying than the murder itself. My fear began to curdle into something else, a cold, hard rage. He had taken my life, my health, my vitality, and turned me into his lab rat. He had isolated me from my friends, my career, my world. He had done it all with a smile and a gentle touch. The weakness I had felt for months began to recede, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I wasn't going to die in that bed. I was going to fight. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed a lawyer, and I needed proof that was more concrete than photos on my phone. I needed evidence that couldn't be explained away. I needed to catch him in the act. My mind started working again, the fog of the poison lifting as I continued to secretly abstain from his care. For the first time in months, I felt my old self returning, the sharp, analytical mind of a designer who solves problems for a living. And this was the most important design problem of my life: how to design an escape. The plan started to form in pieces. First, money. He controlled our joint accounts. Any large withdrawal would trigger an alert. I started getting extra cash back every time I went to the pharmacy for the prescriptions he insisted I take. $20 here, $40 there. I hid the bills in an old book. Second, communication. I couldn't use my phone. He was on our family plan. He could see the call logs. I used my secret cash to buy a prepaid burner phone and the cheapest plan I could find. Third, an ally. I spent hours at the public library using their computers to research lawyers. Not divorce lawyers, but criminal lawyers. I found a woman, Sarah, whose profile radiated intelligence and toughness. Her website had a secure contact form. I wrote out my story, attached the photos of the insurance policy and the lab reports, and sent it into the void, my heart pounding with every keystroke. The next few days were an agony of waiting and pretending. I had to act sicker than ever. I made my movements slow and deliberate. I let my voice quaver when I spoke. I even used makeup to make my face look paler with darker circles under my eyes. Mark seemed pleased with my decline. He became even more attentive, hovering over me, documenting my symptoms in a little black notebook he carried. "Your tremors are more pronounced today," he'd observe, with an air of detached scientific interest. I wanted to scream. Then an email came to the anonymous account I had set up. It was from Sarah's office. She wanted to meet, urgently. The meeting was my first real taste of freedom. I told Mark I had an appointment with a specialist he had supposedly referred me to, a name I had fabricated after seeing it on a hospital directory. He was reluctant to let me go alone, but I insisted. I wanted to feel a flicker of independence. He finally agreed, but told me to call him the second I was done. Sarah's office was a different world. It was a world of strength and action. She was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes that saw everything. She had already reviewed the photos I sent. "The lab reports are damning, but he could argue they're faked," she said, her voice calm and steady. "The insurance policy is highly suspicious, but not illegal. To get the police to act, we need something undeniable. We need current evidence of the poison, and we need to link it directly to him." She laid out the plan. It was terrifying. I had to go back home. I had to continue the charade. But this time, I had a mission. She gave me a small, specialized evidence collection kit. It contained a sterile vial and several small evidence bags. "The next time he makes you one of his special teas or a smoothie, you need to get a sample," she instructed. "Don't let him see you. Even a few drops will be enough. We also need a sample of your hair. A forensic hair analysis can show a timeline of poisoning." Going back into that house was like walking into a lion's den. But now, I wasn't just prey. I was a hunter. That night, Mark brewed my evening tea. He brought it to me in my favorite mug. The steam rose, carrying that familiar, bitter, earthy smell that now made my stomach turn.
He sat with me while I pretended to drink it. I held the warm mug in my hands, my mind racing. I needed a distraction, something to get him out of the room for just a minute. I feigned a coughing fit, a deep, rattling cough that I let build until it sounded truly alarming. I let the mug slip, splashing some of the hot liquid onto my hand and the bedspread. "Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry," I gasped. "I'm so clumsy." He sprang into action, all professional concern. "Don't worry, honey, it's okay." He rushed to the bathroom to get a damp cloth. The second he was out of sight, I worked fast. I pulled the tiny vial from my pocket, uncapped it, and dipped the edge into the puddle of tea on the bedside table, collecting a small sample. I sealed it and tucked it back into my pocket just as he returned. The entire operation took less than 10 seconds. My heart was hammering, but my face was a mask of weak apology. The next part was the hair sample. Later that night, as he slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, I silently slipped out of bed. In the bathroom, with the light off, I used a pair of nail scissors to snip a small lock of hair from the nape of my neck, close to the root. I sealed it in the evidence bag Sarah had given me. I had the evidence. Now I just had to get it to her. The next morning, I told Mark I needed to go to the pharmacy to pick up a refill for one of the many prescriptions he had me on. He was hesitant, suggesting he could go for me. "No," I said, my voice intentionally frail. "Please, I need to feel like I can do one small thing for myself. I'll be right back." He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. I think he saw what he wanted to see, a weak, defeated woman. He relented. I didn't go to the pharmacy. I drove straight to a private lab that Sarah had arranged. It was an anonymous drop-off. I handed the sealed evidence bag containing the vial and my hair sample to a technician who didn't even ask for my name, just a reference number Sarah had provided. As I drove away, a sense of profound relief washed over me, followed immediately by a new wave of fear. The final pieces were in motion. There was no turning back now.
The lab results came back in 48 hours. Sarah called me on the burner phone while I was pretending to nap. "We got him," she said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "The tea sample is positive for a significant concentration of ethylene glycol. The hair analysis shows a consistent presence of thallium and arsenic stretching back for months, with the dosage steadily increasing over time. It's undeniable. We're going to the police with this now." She told me not to go home. She gave me the address of a women's shelter in a neighboring city, a place where I could be safe and anonymous. I packed a small bag with only the essentials: my wallet, the burner phone, a change of clothes, and the old book with my secret cache. I looked around the beautiful house that had become my prison, at the life I thought I had. It all felt like a lie. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. That evening, from the safety of a small, clean room in the shelter, I received another call from Sarah. The police had obtained a warrant. They were at my house. Mark had come home from the hospital to find 2 detectives waiting for him in his perfect, sterile living room. They had a warrant to search the premises, specifically his office and the kitchen. Sarah told me he was completely blindsided. He had tried to play the part of the concerned, confused husband, asking if something had happened to me, if I was okay. The detectives had found his stash of chemicals in a locked cabinet in his office. They found the little black notebook where he had been documenting my symptoms, a logbook of his slow-motion murder. They found the research papers on toxicology he had been studying. The evidence was overwhelming. When they arrested him, Sarah said, he didn't say a word. The mask of the caring doctor finally fell away, leaving only a cold, silent void. He was taken into custody, and I was, for the first time in a very long time, safe. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Police interviews, legal meetings, statements. The story became a local media sensation. Prominent doctor accused of methodically poisoning his wife. His face was plastered everywhere, his professional, smiling headshot a chilling contrast to the headlines. His colleagues were shocked.
His patients were horrified. Everyone said the same thing. Not Mark. He was such a caring man. It was a stark reminder of how easily evil can hide behind a mask of respectability. My own recovery was slow. The doctors at the hospital ran tests that confirmed the months of poisoning had taken a toll on my body, but they were optimistic I would make a full recovery. The physical healing was easier than the mental. The trust I had in the world, in the person I had chosen to share my life with, was shattered. I had nightmares of him standing over me with a mug of tea, his eyes empty. The legal battle was grueling, but with the evidence we had, the outcome was never really in doubt. His defense tried to argue that I had been poisoning myself, that I was mentally unstable and seeking attention. But the evidence trail was too clean. The chemicals locked in his office, his meticulous notes, the money trail from the insurance policy, it all pointed to him. He had been so arrogant, so confident in his control over me and my reality, that he had become sloppy. Faced with a mountain of evidence, he eventually took a plea deal to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to prison, a long sentence that meant he wouldn't be a threat to me or anyone else for decades. The day of the sentencing, I saw him across the courtroom. He looked smaller, diminished, stripped of his doctor's coat and his air of authority. He refused to look at me. There was no remorse in his eyes, only the cold fury of a narcissist whose perfect plan had been ruined. Months have passed. I sold the house, a place tainted with too many dark memories. I moved to a new city, started my design work again, and reconnected with the friend he had so carefully isolated me from. I'm rebuilding my life, piece by piece. Sometimes the fear still creeps in. A stranger's smile might seem a little too kind. A gesture of help might feel like a trap. The scars from his betrayal are deep. But then I remember the moment I decided to fight back, the moment I chose to live. And I know that while he may have taken a part of my past, he will not have my future. The story you just heard is a work of fiction, but it reflects a terrifying reality that many people face behind closed doors. The most dangerous people can be the ones we trust the most. If something in your gut tells you that a situation is wrong, even if you can't explain why, please listen to that voice. Pay attention to the warning signs and never be afraid to seek help. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it. You never know who might need to hear it. And for more true-to-life thrillers and stories of survival, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your awareness could make all the difference.